Joining us now on the guest hotline, powered by Gruber Law, one call, that's all. He is John Steppe, Badgers beat writer for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Follow him on X at JSteppe1. John, thanks for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Always a pleasure.
So we had on Kevin Conley in the last segment from Fox 8 WGHP. He was giving us his thoughts on High Point, as he has them right there in his backyard, mere steps from where his studios are. So we were talking about High Point and a couple players that they have, and more importantly, their ability to shoot the three from outside with a different couple of players. I read your piece earlier today. The pace of play thing just blows my mind. I mean, Wisconsin is actually better than they have been, top third in the Big Ten, and High Point is twice as fast.
Yeah, you're looking at it, and if you like up-tempo basketball, this Portland site really is for you. Because obviously Wisconsin is moving the ball at a tempo that we haven't seen, as has been talked about kind of throughout this season. And then you've got High Point that operates at an even faster tempo. And then, if Wisconsin gets past High Point, then it's Arkansas, which also really likes to push the tempo. So, I think this plays into the way that Wisconsin likes to play games. And, that's kind of one of the things I look at, because obviously you're going to be going up against a good team with a 12 seed and obviously a very good team with a 4 seed, kind of no matter where you are in the bracket. But, I think stylistically this fits kind of how Wisconsin ideally likes to play offensively.
Old school Wisconsin would say, we're going to slow these boys down and we're going to limit their possessions, and that's how we're going to win this basketball game. Listening to you talk, that does not seem like the way Greg Gard in Wisconsin is going to play this one.
No, and you look at it and, Greg Gard has given the analogy of, Nick Boyd needing to know where, it's a school zone and where it's the interstate highway in terms of just how fast of a guard he is. So, Wisconsin's ability to play quicker is a lot easier when you've got a point guard like Nick Boyd, who seems to be continuing to elevate his game against top-level competition. And if you're looking for a reason for optimism for Wisconsin in this NCAA tournament, I think it really is how Nick Boyd continues to elevate his game against top competition, whether that be top teams or top other point guards. I think about, Bennett Sturts in Iowa, comes into the Kohl Center, and Nick Boyd was 1 rebound short of a triple-double. So, Wisconsin really needed a lot out of him, against Illinois, which was a top 10 team at the time. And he scores 38, breaks the Big Ten tournament record for Wisconsin history that had existed for an entire 24 hours because John Blackwell said it the day before. So, this will be, I think, a really exciting team to watch here in March Madness.
So, John Steppe, Badgers beat writer for the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel here on Wisconsin Sports Daily. Steve Sparky Pfeiffer with you. They're getting some national recognition. We played Seth Davis earlier in the show in the first hour, giving praise to both Blackwell and Boyd, like you said, as far as being one of the best backcourts in college basketball. And you look at High Point, and they're not going to be able to match up with these two guys, I don't think. But when you get to Arkansas, if Arkansas wins their first round game, and you got Darius Aircuff, who some are saying could go 4 overall in this draft, who, again, as people that listen know I love, that is going to be a completely different story as far as trying to slow down the explosion of that dude.
Yeah, and that's where, this team has won a lot of its high-profile games with its offense. But that's a matchup where I think it's really going to test how much this defense has improved. Because it certainly has improved in terms of what we're seeing now, what we saw particularly in the first half of the semifinal, Big Ten tournament semifinals against Michigan. That was definitely an improved, showing.
Without Winter.
Yes. Well, most of all, without Winter against a really big team that you look at Michigan, both Michigan and Illinois are teams that on paper – I would have said before those regular season games, I don't think Wisconsin matches up well against these guys. But for them to do what they did without Nolan Winter against Michigan, particularly in the first half, is definitely a sign of defensive improvement. Now, it's not perfect. That second half against Washington, that run in Chicago, you can kind of find the positives or the negatives, depending on, if you're looking for a reason why Wisconsin could get upset, look at the second half of Washington. But, look at the first half of Michigan if you're looking for a reason why, Wisconsin is better positioned now to go up against some of that star talent that Arkansas. And if you beat Arkansas, obviously Arizona, would really give you your hands full there defensively as well. So, it's a really interesting part of the bracket for sure.
We talk with, local Badger guys, listeners, all that stuff. We have national guys on like Mike DeCourcy and those guys. And we come on, and for the last month or so, I keep asking them, all right, so if it's not Blackwell and it's not Boyd, like who's your ex guy? And everybody says Carrington. That's everybody's guy. And my guy has been Austin Rapp. And he is a roller coaster. You don't know what you're getting. But I mean, he was automatic in that game against Michigan. That's one of the main reasons why they were able to hang in there as long as they were. But I still think he's my X factor in this thing, because if he draws a big out to him consistently in this tournament, that's not around the rim with Winter to have to battle with for rebounds, that's a gigantic win for this Badgers program. If they got to worry about defending Rapp, Blackwell, Boyd, and then occasionally Winter from outside, Wisconsin's going to be really difficult. And again, he doesn't have to hit 6 threes in a game. If he hits 2 or 3 a game and just makes them have to come out to him, that's a big deal for Wisconsin.
And it really fits well, too, with what Wisconsin does in terms of ball screens, because it's so much harder to defend that ball screen when not only can the player roll to the basket, but, they can stay out there and hit a 3. And, Ben McCollum from Iowa kind of laid that out perfectly in terms of just there's always a right answer for Wisconsin with their ball screens. And that makes Nick Boyd and John Blackwell look better, too. And you look at it, I don't think it's sustainable in terms of what Rapp did against Michigan with the 6 threes, and I think it was 6 minutes. But, as you said, if he's just showing a little bit of a threat on the perimeter, how much that sets up opportunities for everybody else. And, I even think about, you're mentioning how Carrington has oftentimes been mentioned as the X factor. Well, his 3-point shot has not been, on fire the last couple of games, but the threat of him shooting from deep, I think, has opened up other things. And we've seen more of him driving some more other things. I think of the assist that he had in the regular season finale against Purdue. That really stood out to me. So, it really sets up a lot when you've got so many 3-point shooters aside from, and of course, Boyd and Blackwell also can both hit the 3. So when you have so many 3-point shooters, it really gives this team a high ceiling. There's the inconsistency that, is causing some people like Clark Kellogg to, pick high point, but you also look at, this 3-point shooting, and it gives Wisconsin a really high ceiling here going into the tournament.
Talking with John Steppe, Badgers beat writer, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Follow him on X at JSteppe1. I want to talk about Nolan Winter. I have had a long-standing beef since the Packers season, and now I have it with the Bucks with what I now found out about Giannis, which is bringing guys back when clearly they are not ready, and then they quickly get hurt again. And it's been driving me nuts for the last year. Well, 2 years for the Packers. I didn't know about the Giannis thing until Giannis brought it up. But those are things that just bother me. And we were talking about this earlier with Nolan Winter. Like, do you put him on a minutes restriction? Say, all right, man, we're going to start the game with you. We're going to start the half with you. And then if we need you, we'll bring you back for the last 2 or 3 minutes. You're going to play like 15 to 18 minutes somewhere in that area. But we want to get your feet wet so we can use you a little bit more in that Arkansas game. Has there been any talk about a minutes restriction? Do you expect a minutes restriction?
Well, it's funny you asked this because we just got done talking to Greg Gard probably about 20 minutes or 30 minutes ago. And he said that both Nolan Winter and Jack Janicki were in full go mode in practice, aside from major contact stuff. So that's certainly an encouraging sign. I am curious to see how, full go mode in practice on Monday translates into Thursday, first game. But you look at it and it isn't like Nolan Winter hasn't had plenty of opportunities to play with the other 4 people on the court this season. I think back to the game, I think it was the one at Minnesota where he was on the bench for an entirety of 67 seconds. So he's had plenty of time. I think Nick Boyd knows how to play with Nolan Winter. I think John Blackwell knows how to play with Nolan Winter. So I'm not as concerned in terms of that. Yes, there is a little bit of, okay, he hasn't been out there since March 4th, but I don't think that's necessarily as much of a concern there. And I think it probably helps him in a lot of ways that they didn't rush things. He did go up from out to questionable ahead of the Michigan game, and letting him get those couple extra days, I think certainly doesn't hurt. And I think also, not having a game on Sunday helps everybody, not just Nolan Winter, because this is a team that the last 2 years had played 4 games in 4 days and then lost in the first weekend.
Talking with John Steppe again, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, Badgers beat writer. So the Badgers were ranked 23rd nationally. Now they've moved up to 20 in the USA Today, 9 in the AP poll, but they end up with that 5 seed. Frank Kaminsky, former Badger, livid, and is convinced that the committee doesn't like Wisconsin, has never liked Wisconsin. They never get where they deserve. And one of the key points you can bring up is Purdue, 8 losses. They win the tournament and they get a pat on the butt and go, good job, and they get a better seeding. The Badgers do something similar to that years ago, and it's like, oh, well, it's a big deal. We didn't really put that much into that game. So I understand the frustration. Do you think the tournament committee got it right with a 5 seed?
I think it's probably a fair ranking. I don't think it was a surprise to anybody inside the Kohl Center that they were a 5. It seemed like the writing was on the wall there for a while. I think you look at it, and the thing that maybe hurt Wisconsin as much as anything was its non-conference. They played good teams. It was not a matter of who they were scheduling, but they didn't win a lot of those games that, would have looked really good on a resume. And the team wasn't as good as they were back then. So, those two things are related.
Yep.
But you look at it, and I think Villanova is a game in particular that, that's one that you'd like to have back. That would have been quad 1. You think back to, not necessarily quad 1 opportunity, but even, not losing to TCU. TCU's gone up and down on net. I don't know where exactly they are right now, but, some of those games, okay, if those go differently, Wisconsin has a stronger resume. And, what they do at the end of the year, I think matters a lot. But, those first 2 months still are part of, what this team, showed with their resume. And, if you would have asked a lot of, bracket, projection people, they would have said probably before that Michigan game that it was certainly no guarantee that Wisconsin was going to be in the field at all. So it is quite a remarkable growth from the last 2 months or so for them to go from a team probably on the outside looking in before beating Michigan on January 10th, number 2 in the AP poll, number 1 in the coaches poll at the time, to now being a 5 seed. I think that is probably, if you asked anybody that on January 9th or January 8th, I think anybody would have taken that one in pretty much a heartbeat.
That Villanova game still irritates me. The refs screwed them at the end of that game in regulation. That was one of the most atrocious reffing jobs I have seen all year, watching Badgers, watching Marquette, watching Panthers. I didn't watch a bunch of the Green Bay Phoenix. I apologize, being in Milwaukee. But of those teams that I watched, that was one of the worst ref games as far as not benefiting Wisconsin, and maybe of all the games on the schedule.
Yeah, and I think there are a couple of games that maybe are ones where officiating,
Indiana was horrible too. I take that back. Indiana was worse than Villanova, so I take that back.
Yeah, because I was immediately thinking like, okay, yeah, Villanova had some, calls that I think people, were wondering about, but Indiana was the one where, that really was a what if, especially on the road. That would have been a really nice one to have on their resume. Obviously, Wisconsin, lived to tell the tale in terms of, they then go out and beat, then number 7 Illinois. Let's see, that was 3 days. Yeah, 3 days later. And then another 3 days after that, they beat number 10 Michigan State. So, Wisconsin was okay in the long run. But, some of those games, okay, if you don't necessarily put that in a position for the officiating to be a deciding factor, there's probably a higher ceiling in terms of where Wisconsin could have been seated going into this.
All right, John, what's your pick? How far are they going?
I'm thinking Sweet 16. I think it's possible. The next 2 teams are quality 2 teams that they could be going up against. So, I don't think it's a given by any means. I do think they have, guard play is so important. And when you have 2 that can just put their team on their back, that just makes such a difference. I'm not entirely ruling out that they could go further, but if you go further, you're having to beat Arizona, who is really talented and, is going to be picked to go far in a lot of brackets. So I think Sweet 16 is possible, is feasible. And that would be my pick right now, which I think a lot of fans would be quite happy with, considering what the current Sweet 16 drought has been.
Yeah, no question. I agree with you there. John Steppe, Badgers beat writer, Milwaukee Journal Sentinel. Follow him on X at jsteppe1. Thanks so much for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Always the pleasure.